Hey everyone, and welcome to the webinar on superannuation. I've got Josh here. I can't pronounce your surname.
Van Gestel.
Van Gestel from, is that it?
Yes, it
Whatever
is.
they'll do.
Yeah.
From Sunsuper, who is a show partner of My Millennial Money. And I wanted to do this webinar around super. It is Super September. And Josh, can you tell us just a little bit about your role, because it will just make a lot of sense for those watching.
Absolutely. So I'm the education manager at Sunsuper. So it's actually, in traditional times, I would be flying around the country speaking to our members and prospective members about their super, about their retirement, about their investments. In these days, I've gone completely digital, which I think is great in one regard. I'm speaking to a lot more members and people than I would have traditionally. But on the downside, I'm not seeing people face to face and not connecting. But it is principally my role to be the showman for Sunsuper.
And you've been in super for a million years?
More than half my life.
Wow.
Which, based on the grey in my beard, has been a long time.
I'm not going to ask your age.
No, please don't.
But we are thankful that that Josh is here. Now, let's just have a quick look at the agenda for tonight. We've done the bit of the welcome. Josh has some slides. We'll get him to run through a bit of a 101 around super, and that will just trigger your thought processes around some questions to ask.
Yep.
Then I'm going to kind of dissect the fee discussion and have a chat about fees. I'm going to then talk about, you can all read Topping Up Super. We've got live polls and upvoted live questions. But we would like to begin by acknowledging the darkinjung people, traditional custodians of the land of which our studio sits, and pay respects to their elders, past and present. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us tonight. So welcome. Now, as usual, the recommendations for these type of webinars, it's just to be encouraged. Okay, so find that one thing, whether it's, I didn't know I could log into MyGov. I didn't know I could, change my shoe bending over backwards with my left finger. I don't know, whatever. That was really weird.
Is that what? That's what they discover while they're hearing about super?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and our recommendation is to make sure you upvote questions. Now, and I will just say, everything we discussed tonight is general financial advice, which does not take into your personal financial objectives, solutions, blah, blah, blah. So basically that there says don't sue.
And
you can't sue.
Don't listen to what we say and go, oh, that applies to me.
Yeah. So there you go. Well, if you didn't know, it is Super September, and the thing I've been kind of saying from the rooftops is the lucky BFG. And we are going to cover a lot of this tonight. And at the end of Josh's little part, he's got a little checklist as well, which kind of ties into this as well. And we're not going to cover everything tonight, but make sure you log into MyGov. Make sure your details are up to date. Because I'm thinking, Josh, like Super September in the M3 community, it's daylight savings, it's check your smoke alarm once a year. Let's just do it in September. It's a bit of a nothing month.
And you think it's that spring clean time of year as well?
Totally. So contributions, make sure your employer is paying your contributions. Maybe look at other ways that you might be able to contribute. Know your current fund, which we will get into what you can be asking your fund. Review your insurances if they haven't been. Check your beneficiaries to make sure your ex-husband or wife or partner or spouse isn't still on there from 8 years ago. Make sure your fees aren't 1,000,000%, and question yourself and your fund, is my super invested for growth? If you are also wondering, I feel like I'm talking really loud. I'm going to just use my inside voice. Sorry, everyone. I just get so passionate about super. It's just, I love super.
You'll be working out how to tie your shoelaces backwards as well.
Yeah, that's right.
The rate you're going.
So we've got all these episodes. For example, today's episode, if you're watching now live, it's super for Indigenous Australians. Next week, we've got LGBTIQ plus and money Matters and Super. And then next Thursday, we've got the Super Gender Gap. We've already had an episode about investing inside or outside of super, whether you're self-employed, setting up a self-managed super fund, buying a property with your super. And we also had your colleague, Brian Parker, on the podcast last fortnight or last week. So
that must have been a downer.
he's a funny guy.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
Good old Brian. Yeah.
So lots going on in Super September. So make sure if you want to know more about anything, jump on the podcast and do that. Now, before I throw to you, Josh, it wouldn't be a webinar without a poll. So I want to know, and this is a good way to test the poll, has anyone ever logged in and looked at your super account through MyGov? So we'll give it, look at that.
Immediate response.
We'll give it another 20 seconds. And it's a good way to test the poll feature with the little
Maybe
poll.
you should have asked the question, have any of you actually tried to set up a MyGov account?
Not asking that.
No.
It'd be a nightmare, wouldn't it? Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. So yeah, 84% of you have logged into MyGov. So that's really good. And the 16% who have not, I'll encourage you to do that at some point while September lasts. And we'll do...
While you're in there doing your tax return?
Yes, totally.
Link through your super.
And I'll do one... this is a double barrel poll because I wrecked it. There's 2 questions there. How many super funds do you have? And then your balance. Now, these polls, they're anonymous and they're just basically because most of us are voyeuristic and want to know other people's business.
Yep.
So this will just give you a bit of an opportunity to see what else is out there. And if you just joined us, welcome. We're just about to get started.
So you were talking before we went on air about putting your mobile phone upside down.
Yes.
That means that people can't be seeing who you're getting messages from, though.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah.
I thought you were doing it just to try and maintain a technology-free zone for a brief moment.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Fighting the voyeur.
Yes. All right.
Mate, you've been looking at his phone.
All right, I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1, and let's show the results. So 78% of you have just the one fund. That's good.
Great.
19% have 2 funds. And then 22%, or the lion's share, have between 30 and 50K. And I'm just saying this out loud for the replay and the podcast replay. And 19% have, that's an error. I've stuffed up. 30 grand, we'll just call it. So yeah, a good balance. And there are 6% of people who have no idea. There's 8% who have over 150K. So there is a good...
I'm actually surprised that so few have no idea, to be frank.
Yeah. Well, the My Millennial Money community, they are switched on and dialed in, and we have been doing Super September.
So even though you stuff up your questions on polls, they still stick with you, which is good.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
It's wonderful.
All right, back to the slides. Let's pluck this chicken. Now, a lot of people ask... what's the best super fund, Josh? What super fund should I have? What's the best fund? And I like to say, well, let's look at these brands on the screen.
Well, and I've got a Nissan myself. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a Toyota. Okay. Now, these brands have a few things in common. Number one, long track record of being quality.
Yep.
These brands are Japanese, which also speaks to the longevity and the quality. They're pretty cost effective.
Yep.
And within each brand, there are different features and benefits. So if I said, what's the best car brand on the screen, it's actually really hard to answer that.
And can I make the point, if we want to stretch this, I've gone through the process of just buying a new car, as I said. At the end of the day, it comes down a bit to bells and whistles. There was probably, if I can give you two things that were very stark in my experience, we looked at one brand of car at two different dealerships. And one dealership almost turned us off the car, whereas the other dealership actually convinced us of the car. The difference between the two was one actually made us very aware of the benefits. One made us very aware of what we were buying. The other one just ignored it.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I'd say from it was that we were very aware of what we wanted. We wanted a car that would fit a small family, and that was going to be more as environmentally friendly as a car could without going the full...
Yeah, so back to the what's the best car, what's the best super fund, like the cars, you know, they've all got four wheels.
Yep.
They all carry people. They're all have different options. I don't think you could actually choose one of these and say it's the best. What it is, it's most suited to what I'm after.
Absolutely.
Because we're above the line with quality, we're above the line that it's a car. So I would hypothesize in terms of your superannuation, most funds that you've already got, they take your money and invest it. They have options for growth. Most funds this day and age have reasonable fees. There's a few old dogs out there that have some ridiculous fee structures that are just not around anymore. So I would hypothesize if you do have a current fund that you've set up in the last couple of years, 5 years, it's probably at that base level.
I completely agree. Yep.
So there's an elephant in the room, and his name's Glen James, and I am trying to lose some weight, but, and I make myself laugh. Put your hand up if you think that was not funny. Let's just test the hand raise.
And just remember, Glen's faced social backlash with coughing and sneezing lately, so go gentle on him.
So one person didn't think it was that funny. But I guess what I'm saying is that made me lose my train of thought. What was I saying?
So
sorry. Josh, the elephant in the room.
I was about to give you a train of thought. Yeah. Anyway.
Josh works for Sunsuper. Sunsuper is our podcast show partner. But the concepts that Josh will share tonight, yes, it's got a Sunsuper logo. Yes, we might use some comparisons with fee structure on Sunsuper and investments, but you will learn the concept tonight, and that's what we want to get through. So,
absolutely. And I think it's really important. My role, I'm a financial educator before I'm anything else. Yeah. I'm agnostic, and it's all about how we make people make the most of their super. The more engaged a person is with their super, better it is.
Yeah. So I might hand it to you.
Thank you.
There's the pen if you need to scribble. And we might just take 10, 15 minutes to go through some of the slides you've got, because I think what this will do is there's some questions coming in and you can upvote them if you've got if you like it. There's 2 questions in there already, and we'll make it really interactive. So we might talk for 15 minutes on your slides. I've got some slides around fees. Then we'll just open the floor for questions and go from there.
I think if you see something pertinent come through...
Yeah, we can, if it ties in.
Cut me off. As you know, I am a speaker for a living, so you'll have to cut me off, mate. So why I thought we'd actually talk about how super is invested and what this image is trying to show, a bit to what Glen has said, that regardless of where your super is, I think there's maybe an unawareness of exactly what it's invested in. And I talk about how super's really made up of traditional investments and what we call traditional growth investments, which are things like international and domestic shares. And then we've got these traditional income investments, things like cash and fixed interest. And I think to some extent, that's where people think their money is. They don't think their super is invested elsewhere. And I'll come to that in the next slide, why I think it's important people are both aware that, yes, some of their super's invested in those, but it is actually diversified across a lot more. The typical Australian super fund would put about 50% of your money into shares if you make no choice, and about 50% will be in a whole range of other things. Now, where the issue has come up for super funds over recent times, and Brian may have actually spoken about this in previous podcasts, is that shares really, when you look at over the global financial crisis and the 10 years that followed that, it became very hard to find good shares worth buying into. The other thing, if we look at the recent events with COVID, incredible volatility that comes with those, and we've seen a lot of people maybe show their discomfort, and that's a point I'll come back to in a moment. The issue we've got with the other traditional assets, cash, fixed interest, bonds and bank accounts just don't give you the investment returns they once did.
So I guess for people that might not know, cash is literally cash in an account. Yep. So a portfolio might hold cash, and fixed interest is basically, you said bond, but it could be a term deposit
Absolutely.
Type thing. So
yep.
It's invested over an X amount of time for a fixed amount of interest.
And super funds could be buying those from banks, from corporations, from a whole range of areas. But the reality is both cash and fixed interest, if I go back 10, 15 years ago, probably provided some growth benefit, but absolutely now they don't. And so where you've got super funds, so it's these investments super funds used to invest in, but where they're now starting to look at is things like private capital. Being aware that a lot of companies, a lot of major companies, a lot of companies that are growing and very important to invest in aren't actually listed on the share market and providing opportunity. Obviously, super funds are going more into property, infrastructure. Infrastructure, I think as well, there's been a lot of discussion around how super funds are investing in infrastructure and may, as we look at a recovery out as we come out of COVID, and also hedge funds, which for our purposes tonight, I'll just say that's where we're actually investing in cash or currency rather. Why though I wanted to point this out is that I think people saw the share market do what it did in February, March, April this year and freaked out about their super. Couple of things to put into perspective, that although we saw the share market go down dramatically, and this is the ASX 300 here, what you saw was that the superannuation sector or superannuation investments that had exposure in shares with that diversification actually did not fall as sharply. And that's the first thing, that you sort of see these deep troughs that the diversification in super funds actually levels out. The other thing is that if you look back to the global financial crisis from then to now, what you've seen is this incredible period of growth. So it's important that super funds still invest in those areas, such as the ASX, but that they do it in such a way that they're taking advantage of the share market's recovery, which we will see at some point happen again in the future. But that they're also diversified in such a way as to limit some of that volatility that we've seen in that period. The other thing, and I won't linger on this, is that what we saw in that downturn in February, March, April was that a lot of people may have actually reacted to what was happening on share markets and made the decision to chuck their money into more conservative investments. If you think about the people listening and watching tonight, most of us are actually aware we've got a long-term view for our super, but still the gut tells a lot of people that might just have a conservative nature to chuck their money into other areas, such as conservative investments or things like we see around fixed interest and cash. If I go back to the global financial crisis, people who made that decision back then would today have only just made their money back over those 10 years that followed. What they've missed out on is, although we've seen downturns over the 10 years or so that have followed, and especially this year, there's been this huge amount of growth that has actually occurred by staying the course.
Can I just draw something on here?
Absolutely. It's your iPad.
Well, I just want to, because it's such a good example, and I might, I'll draw it on here. So we've got the different balanced and growth portfolio, okay?
Yep.
So let's do the example. If this is, I guess, time, and this is the value, I want to just kind of explain this growth type portfolio, because people say, where should I invest my super? Should I have it in cash? And you've illustrated there that, well, no, because it could cost you money in the future. So let's use the example that over a 30-year period, or actually we'll go from 0 to 30 years, cash is doing this.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yep.
We know international shares might be doing this. And I'm being dramatic, everyone, for the illustration. We know Australian shares might kind of follow that as well. So we've got Australian, international, and then cash. Basically, what super funds do, they might have a growth portfolio here that would have an allocation to, 30% international, it might be
another
30% Australian shares.
Yep.
So what super funds do, and then it might have the rest in cash and conservative assets. Basically, the goal is with these growth and balanced portfolio is to blend all these lines so you've kind of smoothed out your return.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's really important to understand that, yes, you do possibly need to take risks. And I would hypothesize, if you're under 30 at the moment, or say if you're 30 years old now, you can't touch your super until at least 60.
And I even look at it further than that. Your super could be something you have till you're 85 or 90.
Exactly. So what the thing is, people go, should I move my money to cash here? Well, why have it in an asset that isn't growing when we don't need it for 30 years?
Yep.
Let's just put it to work. We just need to understand the risk.
Now, the other thing I should just point out with the chart you've scribbled all over, that's incredible.
Oh, and you're an artist.
Not an abstract artist.
Yeah.
But the other thing I should point out, what this chart is showing is a $10,000 initial investment. Oh, this one we've got...
No, this one here is 10,000.
Okay. But we should say in both those charts, it is not showing contributions going in.
Exactly.
So this is pure balance with growth. You add in, I think it's something we'll touch on very briefly, but you add in contributions going in, the compound interest effect on top of that, you'll see this chart actually accelerate enormously.
Yeah. So I guess I just wanted to kind of just unpack that for people who may have been confused what balanced and growth was. And super funds, you pay them a fee, and we'll get to fees, to manage that money into an allocation that suits your risk tolerance.
Yep.
So there is, I guess it's really not relevant for now, but as you said, Josh, just because you turn 60 tomorrow, it doesn't mean we move all our money to cash, because the money's still got to go to work.
And I think that's
another 20 years.
That's probably a mistake that we often see. People hit these stages of life. Even I would say people become parents and they all of a sudden take on this conservative viewpoint in some of the decisions they make. It is at those points that you really have to still think, well, where's the long game?
Yeah.
And you see people almost react at different points in their life because they believe that's what actually they should do, as opposed to thinking, hey, I've still got 20, 30, 40 years for this to play out.
And I'm just going to draw one diagram and then I'll pass on, because I've drawn this for so many people when I've done pre-retirement planning. And while you're watching, you might be 30, 45 years off from retirement. This is something you might pass on to your parents. It might be something you pass on to your grandparents, or just know yourself.
Yep.
So if I draw the time, so if that's time and this is dollars, once you retire, it's not as if, okay, I've turned age 65, I'm going to retire. Now I'm going to just withdraw my super, my 500 grand of super, and put it in my bank account. No. So basically, if this is age 60 and you stopped working, and we make this age 85, for example, life expectancy ish.
Yep.
Yes, we still want the money working, which could still be doing this, right? But when you get to this pointy end and you speak to an advisor, you might say, hey, our target to live on per week is $1,500. The money's invested, and regardless of what's happening in the markets, your portfolio is still drawing down the $1,500 a week or whatever it is to live off. So that's the fallacy of people getting to retirement and moving all their money to cash.
And I would actually say the other thing people don't think about, or maybe don't consider, at that beginning point, when they're 60, 65, that is potentially the largest point of that asset. So it still has enormous growth potential ahead of it. So you've got two options. Do you really effectively lock it away? Or do you think, I've got this pool of money which still has enormous potential ahead of it?
Totally.
Now, notwithstanding, there has to be maybe a middle ground between that. But I still think too often we see people perhaps going one way or the other.
Yeah.
And either making a decision they feel uncomfortable with, and we see that bite them in periods like COVID, or they make a decision that they will spend the rest of their life playing catch up on making up for.
Totally. So that's just a bit of a sidetrack. Sorry, I hijacked.
That's all right.
I just think...
you know Brett Whiteley, but, you know.
Yeah. So Josh is actually a legit artist in his spare time. Are you a sketcher or?
No, I'm a painter.
Painter.
I'm doing sketching a lot at the moment, but
Yes.
I'm actually a painter. So I've got, if I can put it to you, I'm finding this week very hard because the Archibald Prize has gone in.
Yes.
And I've entered the Archibald Prize a number of times, but this year I didn't put an entry in. So I've seen all my friends putting their entry in, and I'm feeling like crap because I didn't.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right.
So let's get back to...
The only other thing I think to touch on, because we have flirted with this already, is this shows you the effect of compound interest. We've actually got a rogue cicada in the room. Is that your concern there? Right. Is compound interest. So what we've got here in this slide is trying to show a bit again what you've said, Glenn, that you almost get these people that get to maybe 50, 55 and go, right, I'm now going to start chucking money into super before it's too late. And that's the yellow line that we're showing here, that people put in larger amounts of money just before retirement. I said I've worked in super for almost half my life, or just over. I wish I could go back to myself back then and say, mate, start chucking some money in. Smaller amounts over the long term. And in this example, we're saying both lots, both the blue and the yellow, they're effectively putting the same amount of money in. One person's doing it over a very long period, in this case 20 years. One person's doing it over half that, 10 years. But the person putting it in over 20 years is just making much better outcomes by result of compound interest. And if I can maybe put it to you this way, the other thing we're seeing people ask at the moment with COVID is the share market's having an impact on my super. Compound interest is where you actually think the share market at the moment is low and going to give my super great opportunity. Why don't I actually top it up? So especially for those people who have time on their side, don't wait till retirement. If you can be putting in even small amounts, $20 a week, $50 a fortnight, a month, whatever, you will see the benefits of that in the long term. So just thinking about that, how can you put money into super? There are so many complexities with super. I just want to demystify it a bit. If you do want to think about putting additional monies in and taking advantage of compound interest, there are two main ways that you can do it. First is by what we call a concessional contribution or pre-tax. Basically, it means you're either doing it and claiming it in your tax return, or you're getting your employer to do it for you and effectively taking it out before tax is applied. So whether you do it yourself or get your employer to do it, effectively it comes out to the same outcome. So what you can do here, you've got your 9.5% going in from your employer, may go to 12%, depending what we see happen in the budget in another 2 weeks' time. You can then on top of that choose to sacrifice money. Go to your payroll where you are actually gainfully employed and ask payroll to chuck some money in pre-tax for you. If your payroll doesn't, or if you're self-employed, what you can actually do, just make it as a personal contribution. You chuck in, you claim it as a tax deduction in your tax return. What you'll see with all of these contributions is the moment they enter into your super, 15% tax comes off that. Okay, so that money goes in. What you then have though is the ability to put in money yourself which you do not claim as a tax deduction. So think about it in this way. You can put money in that effectively goes through the tax cycle and one way or another is actually going to reduce your tax in some way or be taxed at a lower rate in super. Or you put money in post-tax and the government's incentive here is they'll chuck in some extra as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, you mentioned the 15% contributions tax.
Yep.
So if someone had $300 a month left over in their budget that they wanted to invest for the long term, well, the question is, do I want to pay 15% tax on that and put it away invested for the long term, or bring it home and pay maybe 28% tax or whatever your marginal tax rate is?
And there is actually a tipping point as to when to decide to do it one way or the other.
Yeah.
But really you think about it on, do I want to actually get a tax benefit today? Or do I put it in without claiming any tax benefit and potentially get this government incentive as well? I'm not going to steal your thunder because I know you're going to cover it off. I will mention it briefly in a moment. But also, you've got to think about where you're actually in a spousal relationship, there is also opportunity. And I know in my own case, this was something that my wife, Tash, and I actually worked with when she was off work, when my son was born. So you do have to think about spousal support. And I'll come to that actually, I think, on the next slide. Yes, I do. Okay. So there's all these different ways that you can put money into super on top of what your employer's doing, but you're probably going, well, which way do I go? And it shouldn't just be a matter of whether you want a tax advantage or not. It should probably come down to what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. So the first thing to think about is if you're earning less than 37 grand, you're actually going to benefit from what's called LISTO, or the low income super tax offset. And this means that any money that your employer puts in to your super, that 9.5%, plus if you put in a pre-tax contribution that you claim in your tax return, the government is going to actually give you part of that tax back, and they'll give you up to $500. If I can do the math on this, 37,000 times by 9.5% super guarantee, which your employer puts in, times by 15% tax equals $500. So the government will effectively give you $500 for doing nothing, okay? You don't need to complete anything to benefit from this. If though you're earning less than $40,000 and you've got a spouse, if they chuck money into your account, it's going to benefit you by growing your super, but they, as the contributing spouse, are also going to get a tax offset of $540.
It's 18%?
Yep.
Or 540, whatever's higher.
Brilliant. So that's if you're earning around that area, that's where you actually go to your spouse and talk to them about their tax opportunity. They put the money into your account, but they'll get a tax offset as a reward for that. Where it starts then getting a bit more complicated is you talked about this idea, if you've got a bit more extra cash, of putting it into super, you might be able to actually get a tax benefit for that, but that tax benefit really only kicks in when you start earning about 48 grand. Why I say that, if you're earning less than 48 grand, super is taxed at 15%. We've talked about that. If you earn less than 48 grand, your own tax return, you're probably paying less than 15% in tax.
So it's a tipping point.
That's right. So if you're chucking money into super when you're earning less than $48,000, you're potentially paying more tax on it than you otherwise would if it's in your own pocket.
Okay, so we have a lot of single parents, for example, that are in the community. And, you know, if you're working part-time, you might be getting 48 grand a year, you might be getting $40,000 a year.
Yep.
Now, the only kind of free lunch I would suggest at that season in your life, because if you're a single parent, you're not destined to earn 40 grand for the evermore, amen. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's just a snapshot in that part of your life.
Absolutely.
It's probably suggested that you wouldn't put more than $1,000 in of your own money, because then the government will match that up to $500.
Absolutely. Which
look at that.
The next one.
Look at
nice
that.
Segue.
Yes.
So what I'm really saying is, if you're earning less than 55 grand, that's exactly where you want to do that. Yeah. Put that money in after tax. Don't claim it in your tax return. The government, for $1,000 that you put in, the government will put in another 500. So the decision point for you is one of both income, but it's also thinking about, do you have a spouse, and also where's your best capacity? Probably you can see here, the question mark is for those people that earn between about 48,000 and 55,000. Maybe you just have to do a little bit of math of thinking which way goes best. I'd probably err on the side of caution and say government co-contributions always going big.
I'm kind of on the view in my years when I was a financial advisor, and particularly talking with my own family, that, you know, if you are earning under 55 grand a year, maybe just as a maximum throw in $20 a week post-tax, because at least you'll get the 500 from the government.
Absolutely.
And let's be honest, if you're in Australia earning 50 grand a year or less, it might be tight for you anyway. So it's not as if you're going to have a spare 8 grand to dance with. And
I think all of this, if I can come back to something I briefly mentioned, it's taking the opportunity when it presents itself. There might be a year where your income is low because you've decided to work part-time because you've just started a family, or you might have a spouse who has finished up work and there's an opportunity there, and although money's going to be tight and you have to think about it, potentially gives you an opportunity you may not have the next year or have the year prior. So it's really just saying it's another point for you to consider and weigh up. But absolutely, to your point, it's also thinking about where are you going to get the best advantage. And I don't always think that's just saving tax. It's going to be where's the government going to put in for you as well.
And I think as well, like if you are starting off your financial life, you know, you will generally have goals in your life. It's like you want to save for a house, you want to travel the world. And that's why I would just encourage you just to know this stuff and just take some pressure off yourself. And it might be, look, in our financial life, we're just going to get that big rock done first, which is our home deposit. Then once we've got that big rock done, then we can just slowly cash flow.
I'm very often asked the question, should I put money towards my mortgage or put money towards my super, right? And my answer to that usually is,
it depends.
Well, absolutely. But it can ebb and flow. It's not like you have to lock into, I'm going to put in $50 a month every month to my super and that's how forever it will be. If you have the capacity, put the money into super and take the opportunity. If you don't have capacity, or if it's more important to you to be thinking about your mortgage, then that's the opportunity.
And I would really encourage you, like, if you're a family unit or you're single, whatever the situation is, if you've got money left over and you want to invest in the future and you've got a mortgage, I mean, one, you've got to listen to the episode that we did on the podcast, and we go for an hour about pay off the mortgage or invest.
Yep.
But if in doubt, why not do a bit of both?
Yep.
If in doubt. And I like what you said about the ebbs and flows, because it's not all about one thing or the other. In my own personal life, I found it very beneficial to do the death by 1,000 cuts. And that's, I'll just drip feed my investments every week, every month, because I don't miss it.
Yep.
And I'll spend the bastard if it's laying around otherwise.
Well, and I think in my world, what I used to do, certainly when family came along and all the rest of it, things changed. But what I used to do was I used to actually just bank my bonus.
Yeah.
I'd never actually let it go into my wallet. It would go directly into my super or directly into other investments. And whenever new money came into my life, that was sort of the attitude I had. And that is, to your point, that's what gave me my deposit for my mortgage.
And a lot of people say, like, we know investing's for the long term. And I always say, if only we all had an investment account that was already set up for the long term.
Yep.
Like, yes, I know that we can't access it. So I think it's just, the clients that I've had over the years who have systematically invested more than the 9.5% in their super, really easy. It's just wild what happens when they've turned age 60.
Yep.
So what else do you got for us?
Wonderful. The last thing, I think it's pretty much the last thing. One of the last things I want to talk about is we have had a lot of people, understandably, over the last 6 months or so, have to make the decision to actually think about withdrawing some of their money from super. Now, what we're wanting to do here is that is going to have an impact. So jumping to this slide here, and there's been a lot of these stats thrown around, so I don't want to linger too much on it. But what you'll see is that if someone has taken this year all that they can from super, $20,000, and you play out the math, what we're saying is that at retirement, that potentially would be worth closer to $55,000 for them as a result of compound interest. So it's very important to realise that, people have accessed their super and fully acknowledge again that they had that need. But hopefully at some point, when they're back on their feet, they see things return to normal, maybe there's an opportunity that comes along, they can actually fill that gap back to some extent. But this is maybe also thinking about the impact that a small amount of money can have over time. So what I've got here is someone who just puts in $20 a month. What you'll actually see is that with the co-contribution that goes in on top of that, $500, and this assumes that they're earning enough to get, earning under the rate to get the co-con, it would take that person 6 years to make that $10,000 back. Or if they've withdrawn $20,000, it'll take them 13 years to do it. So the other reason why I say that is that putting in $20 a month could mean that basically in 6 years you've invested $10,000 with the government's help. The other thing I should note, I have not included compound interest here. This has no investment return applied to it. This is purely you putting contributions in without that effect.
Yeah. Love it.
All right. We won't really...
Yeah, so there are some questions on insurance.
Yep.
And I was talking with Josh before. I don't want to use the time on insurance because we did a whole webinar and you can watch it on YouTube, and it's just about insurance. We might swing back around and touch on it at the end, but realistically, to do the whole insurance discussion justice, we do need time, and that's why there's a webinar that went for an hour and a half just on the insurance.
Completely agree. I've just done a tick and flick on the insurance slides, and
Love it.
To be honest, that's usually all the attention people pay to it. So I agree,
Yep.
spend the time. Yep. Last thing I want to do, and this is the segue from your BFG that I just want to highlight. This is my super checklist, thinking about it being spring cleaning month. My tips are, firstly, to stay connected with your super fund. If they've got a mobile app, download it. It's not sexy to have your super fund on your phone, but I find that the people who have it, who engage with it, you can change your investments with most funds over the app. You can see what your employer's doing with contributions. You can check in on your insurance. People who are connected to their fund are generally more in control of it and have a better awareness of what their fund is actually doing. Contribute extra when you're able to and take advantage of those opportunities the government provides, including thinking about your spouse helping you if they're in a position to do so. That again gives them access to government opportunity. To a point we were just discussing, do go off and look at your insurance and weigh that up and consider it. I really, really do encourage that. And lastly, I would say engage with your super fund. We were talking about the car analogy. How many people actually lift up the bonnet and have a look? How many people think about the bells and whistles with their car? Don't assume that you've got this Japanese model and it just gets you from A to B. Look at some of the luxury ads you've got. Look at some of the features that you've got. Make sure that your super fund, at the end of the day, you're paying them an admin fee. You're paying them to look after your super. Make sure you're actually getting full benefit out of that. And what do I mean by benefits? Some super funds will give you access to free financial advice. Some funds will give you access to discounts, rewards. Some funds will give you access to a whole range of things that unless you lift up the bonnet, you've got no idea.
And I do know Sunsuper is a show partner and you're being very diplomatic, but, I'm just to put my stake on the ground. I'm personally a member of Sunsuper because I figure, they support me. So I'll put my super with them and, award-winning fund. But I get an email and it's like, you can do this course and get a discount. You can do this and do that.
Yep.
So it's just the different things that, yes, the car's got 4 wheels, but what's important to you? Yep. And I don't think whatever super fund you're in at the moment, unless it's a bloody old fund that was set up in 1980 and there's a freaking 8% contribution fee or some rubbish like that, your super fund within itself, it's probably okay. But this is why we want to do Super September, to open the hood, and I'm about to show you how to compare fees yourself.
Yep. Absolutely.
So
I'm a bit concerned now that you say you're a Sunsuper member. It means that I'm beholden both to you and my wife in how your super's going.
Yes, exactly. So, and there are some questions and I can see them and we will get to them. But again, with the insurance thing, trust me, you want to take the time and really, really review that in its own right.
Can I, in 30 seconds, give you the insurance?
Please.
I think. Okay. Take the time, make sure that it's adequate is the first thing. Most super funds will give you a default cover that they just assume is going to fit the member.
I've never seen a default amount of cover that's adequate.
No, absolutely correct. It usually won't be. So again, it's about lifting up the hood. See what insurance you've got and make sure it'll be adequate. And I would suggest that's covered in your podcast and what to think about there. Types of insurance, there are generally 3 types in super. Know what they are, what they'll give you and what you need from them. But the third thing, if nothing else, one thing I would encourage everyone to do is tell your super fund where you want your super to go in the event of your passing.
Yeah, let's actually
no one
touch
thinks
on that.
about it.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably the scariest thing. And let me put it to you this way. If you don't make a choice, your super fund's going to have to decide.
Yep.
The courts can get involved and every man and his dog can make a claim. Tell your super fund, at least then you've got some control when you're well and truly gone.
Yep. So I'm now drawing, so that's a car.
Is it?
Yep, believe it or not. That's your house with your windows and the door and little kitchen window there. This is it's an investment portfolio.
Mr. Squiggle.
Yeah, yes, that's right. In your own name.
Yep.
And this is a bank vault, and it's got your cash in it. So all of these, and I'll just say this is Glen James. Okay, these are all my assets.
Yep.
Now, the thing that, if there's one thing that you pick up tonight and you're not aware of, this is a document. It's called a will. Okay. Now, if I was to die tonight, my will actually dictates what happens to my assets.
Yep.
Superannuation.
Bingo.
It's a trust arrangement.
Yep.
And your super does not form part of your estate. So if I died tomorrow, the estate of the late Glen James would be my shares in my own name, my house in my name, any cash I've got, and all my crap.
Yep.
So it's very important that on your super fund, you have beneficiaries and you elect what you want to happen to money when you die.
And can we point out, we've had people tell us in the poll at the start, their super balance is what, 30, 40,000?
There's one with over 170. That's a significant wealth.
You could have in insurance, which is sitting outside of your will, you could have in insurance another $500,000 or
That's
200,000. Right. So you're not just talking about your super balance here, you're talking potentially a huge sum of money.
So 100K in super, 500K insurance, you die, all this crap in your estate, and then we've got 600 grand here that the super trustee has to elect where to pay that money.
Yep.
Me personally, I don't have a spouse or partner or financial dependents, so I've elected that my super I've actually elected that it goes to my estate. Now, basically the trustee has discretion. If I've got which I have, a binding nomination of beneficiary, I've signed that and there's been a witness sign it. 2 witnesses that watch me sign that, and that lasts 3 years, and that's binding. So the trustee is bound to pay the money.
So I actually say it's effectively, that's a legal contract between you and Sunsuper.
Yes.
In that case, yep.
Absolutely. However, if you don't have a binding one, you might have a beneficiary that it's an election, like I would like this money to go to my spouse. Yep. But your side piece has been on the scene and says, no, Glennie's been giving me some sugar as well. If it's not a binding beneficiary, all parties can approach the trustee and the trustee can decide where that money goes. Finally, if there's no election, the trustee, and I've had death claims where there's been no election, basically the trustee makes, it's at their discretion where the money's paid to.
And you think also about the timing here. You're dead and gone. You're floating with God herself or Buddha or Allah.
Yep.
I was raised by a feminist, Catholic feminist. So you're gone. You're not worrying about this stuff. If you've got a binding nomination, that legal agreement between you and the super fund in place, you're talking a matter of days or weeks for it to be paid out. If it is a preferred nomination where you've said, yeah, I'd sort of like it to go to this person, but I'm not fully committed, then you're talking minimum of 3 months by law. Minimum of 3 months, then involve the courts and let it go its course. If you've got no nomination, that I've personally, or not personally, professionally been involved with a case that went for 7 years. There ain't any money left at the end of that.
Yeah.
And in that case, it was 2 kids fighting their mum for the dad's money. So this is serious stuff. So if nothing else, I would say think about your insurance, absolutely, but know that you know where your insurance plus your supers, where it's going.
Totally. And then just as a bonus thing, if you see one of the advisors on the Sort Your Money Out website and I refer you to an advisor, they might set you up a policy that's paid from your super. And if you do have a blended family, you might have one death policy of 500K. We'll give that to the spouse, and then you can elect your actual super to go to your children. So there are options, but you just need to be aware of this stuff.
Yep.
Now, I'm going to go back to, because what we're going to talk about now, for the next probably 10 minutes or so, I'll give a bit of a rundown about fees. So what are not fees? When you are comparing your super fund, the contribution tax of 15%, like people will write in the Facebook group and say, oh, that looks interesting, I'll make that a no. Wow. Well, it is a bit of a, no.
I'm not even going to.
Yeah. That's not a fee because everyone pays that regardless of your super fund. Okay, so...
And can I say it's also 2 levels of tax. You've got 15% on your contributions, 15% also coming off your investment earnings.
Totally.
Yep.
So you can't use the tax part as your comparison.
Yep.
Or the insurance. So people write in the Facebook group, I've paid $200 this month in insurance, tax and that out of my super fund. Am I getting ripped off? Well, hard to say because I'm about to show you how it is so different.
Yep.
So when you're comparing insurance and tax are not fees. Broadly speaking, if this round circles your super account, there will generally be a member fee, and I'm using Sunsuper as an example because why not? What am I doing? It's not 1.5% on another freaking planet. It's $1.50 per week.
Thank you.
You've got an admin fee.
Yep.
Which is 0.10%.
Yep.
So if I've got 23 grand of super, before it's invested, there's a fee of 0.1 and $1.50 per week.
Yep.
And then the third broad fee, I might choose to invest it in this balanced option. The actual investment will have an investment fee, and I'll show you on the next side, there can be a couple of prongs to that.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
So broad brushstrokes, there are 3 types of fees to most retail or industry super funds. Now, there are some other fees, and I'm not getting into it tonight because it's beyond the scope, and it's called a buy-sell spread, and every fund and investment has this. It's a small fee when you switch in and out of an investment option. I personally don't think it's material for my own life when I am comparing funds because it is usually a small once-off fee. So let's ignore the buy-sell spread tonight. But broadly speaking, I'm going to run an example. So I went onto the Sunsuper website this afternoon and I looked at some of these. So if we look at the growth investment option, the investment fee, Sunsuper will charge 0.21% for this option, or the balance index 1.08. Some active fund managers will charge a performance fee, and it's usually very nominal, and buried in the fine print, it might say, if we do a return that is over X amount, we want to be paid more because we've done a good job at managing your money.
Yep.
And then there's a fee, indirect cost. That's basically, as you like to say, keep the lights on.
Yep.
And for example, if this is the balanced fund and this is the Australian equities portion, there might be 3 different fund managers that manage Australian equities, all within Australian equities. Part of that ICR is connected to that.
And it would also be, for example, if a fund's buying an airport,
Yes.
okay, you don't, you have to go through legals, you have to go through running the airport, you have to go through maintaining the airport and operating the airport. That all comes into it as well. The only other point I'd make is just an important word that's there is estimated.
Yes.
And what that is actually showing, it's important to think about when you look at the investment fees. These are the fees that we're proposing as a super fund we're going to charge based on the performance objectives we've got. And the reason why they're estimated, to your point, is there might be a performance-related fee that's target-based. Well, it's estimated what they're going to get if they achieve that target.
Yep.
If they don't achieve that target, then the actual applied fee is going to be different.
Yep.
So
generally speaking, this fee here, 0.67, if the fund says over the last 8 years, it's performed 8%, generally speaking, that is after fees.
Yep.
So this fee here of 0.67 is already taken off. So the actual performance of the fund is 8.67%, but we're taking off a fee, so the wash up is 8%.
And that would also usually incorporate the tax as well. So you're
Exactly.
seeing that as real return.
Yep. So if we go back to this slide here, we've got $1.50 a week member fee. We've got an admin fee just for rocking up and having the money in there of 0.1%. And then we've got an investment fee of 0.67%.
Yep.
Or whatever. You might choose 3 different options and there would be a fee for each investment option.
Yep.
You might just choose cash and there'll be a very small fee to hold the cash.
And that's a good point. That it goes back to what I said earlier. If you're investing in an option that invests in infrastructure, it's going to be much more expensive for a fund to hold infrastructure, buy it, maintain it, control it, than just going to the bank and getting cash.
This is why it's so important. You can't actually, when someone says in the Facebook group, I'm paying $28 a week in super fees, it actually means nothing and you can't compare it because you don't know what investment option they've got.
Yep.
And to this point, we know that growth has a higher allocation to growth assets than balanced. We know it costs slightly more to actively manage growth assets.
Yep.
It's just the way of the world. So it's really hard to, and this is kind of what gets up my goat with some of the APRA tables that the government put out to say these are the top 10 performing funds or whatever,
Yep.
the heat maps. It's really hard to compare because they might be comparing Australian Super to Sunsuper, and Australian Super's done this, Sunsuper's did this. You can't compare because both of the investment options might not have exactly 71.5% to
Yep.
growth.
Yep.
Like you actually can't compare down to the, it's just wild.
And it's been a major point, like how do you compare apples with apples? And unfortunately, what it does mean in this regard goes back to the earlier discussion. You have to look under the bonnet.
Totally.
You have to look at what you're actually investing in.
So this is how I would crunch numbers. And if you've got a phone or whatever, you want to take a screenshot of this. I've assumed that there's $23,000. So we go $23,000 times 0.67, which is those 3 fees, gives us $154. We've got $23,000 times 0.1, which is $23, and $150 per week times 52 weeks in a year is $78,
Yep.
which equals $255. Or if we go 255.1 divided by 23,000, it will spit out 0.00111. Just do times 100 and that will give you the actual percent on your calculator.
Yep.
So you cannot compare super fees based on a dollar amount. It has to be percentage, and you have to turn, you need to annualize the member fee, and you have to turn these so it's all the same. And as a general rule of thumb, I've said for years, anything around or under 1%, beautiful. because it costs money to manage it. Like,
Yep.
so your super fund, they allocate the money, they pay the tax on your behalf, they manage your money.
And it's also you're getting access to large investment capability. The thing that we should reflect on, the productivity review in superannuation 2 years ago now, I think, found that you could get fees as high as 1.8%. To your point earlier, a lot of those older funds. So it is really important to have a look and make sure you are getting a fee that is more reasonable.
Yeah.
It could be significantly higher than what we're discussing here.
Yeah. So here's an option, the Sunsuper Balanced Indexed option. We don't have time to get into styles of investing tonight, but an indexed fund basically just tracks whatever the different indexes are. And if you want to Google active versus passive Glen James, there'll be a blog first hit and I'll explain it. But you can see it's cheaper to have an indexed fund because there's no human smarts, basically. They're just tracking what the market does.
That's right.
So if we use the same example, 23 grand, you can start to see how competitive this Sunsuper account is.
So the index fund is basically, if you were in a share index fund, it's trying to do what the share market, or it should reflect the share market today.
Yeah.
If you're in an active share fund, it's trying to outperform the share market.
Totally.
That's where the fee difference comes in.
And then you get some scale. If we add this to $82,000 and take a photo of that screen if everyone wants, before I scribble on it, because this here is a fixed fee, the more money you get, the lower the percentage comes.
Yep.
So if someone's got 82,000 in the Sunsuper Balanced Indexed option and says their fee's 0.42, which it would be, that's such a bloody cheap investment fund. Like, why would you have a self-managed fund?
And again, it is a point of making sure these fees operate in different ways. Funds will operate member fees differently. Some will be fixed, some won't be. So again, look at what you've got and look at what they're charging, and that's when you really start to question it.
Totally. We are drastically running out of time. Contribution splitting, basically what that means is if this is, I'll just go the working spouse, their super, and the non-working spouse that might take 2 years off. If someone's earning 60 grand a year plus super, they would get 5,700.
5,700.
Thank you, it's late. So 5,700 less the contributions tax. The net wash up into their super fund is $4,800. At the end of the financial year, you can write to your super fund, and there's a form on the ATO website. Just Google ATO contribution splitting.
Yep.
Really easy. You can actually split 85% of the contribution, which is basically the wash up after tax. So you could basically send to the non-working spouse over 2 years. I just did it, divided by 2, put an extra 2,400 in the non-working spouse. You could spend the $4,800 one.
And this is really important. There's a whole range of reasons why you'd want to balance out spousal balances. But you even think what you're doing here is making sure that compound interest keeps working for them while they're actually not working in this case. They're still going to have admin fees coming out. They're still going to have investment fees coming out. They're going to have insurance premiums coming out. By making sure you're splitting and keeping that money going into their account, it means that that split is effectively absorbing that. Yep.
So that's an option to add money to your income earning spouse's super fund at the end of every financial year without it affecting your cash flow. And this does not get talked about enough in financial circles.
There's no income requirements for it. There's no working requirements for it. I actually do that for my spouse.
And I think that the spouse has just got to have under 500 grand of super, which I think most would. Yep. The next one, spouse contribution, if the spouse has an income of, under 37 grand, you touched on it before, you could put 3 grand in the spouse's super account, and the spouse would get the working spouse would get a $540 tax offset, or a maximum offset of 18% if you put a grand in, $180. So that's an option as well. So there's 3 main things that you can look at for a non-working spouse. And I would really encourage you to watch the replay of this tomorrow when it goes up, or if you're watching on YouTube now, you can just Google this stuff on the ATO website. Really straightforward. If someone put $100,000 personal contribution into the spouse's account, they would receive the $500 government co-contribution. If there was 3 grand laying around, you could put that in, and you could also split super. There's an extra $6,500 that you could use to boost the non-working spouse is super in over the next couple of years, or whatever you want. So it really is a goodie.
It's also a really good strategy, and we won't unfold it now, but it's a really good strategy for people as they approach pension age as well. If you've got one person with lots of money in their account and the other person with very little, there might be, again, if you're talking to mums and dads or grandparents, there might be really good opportunity for them to use this. So there are a couple of different reasons you would look at it.
So while everyone stays awake, I've launched another poll. Do you put more into super than your 9.5%? We're just going to wake up everyone, and we've got 15 minutes to go or so, and then we'll answer some questions. I'm going to end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to share the results. 41% of people put more money into super.
Wow.
How good's the My Millennial Money
brilliant.
community? 10% said they don't, and 48% they don't, but they're keen.
That is phenomenal.
So mark my words, everyone. Get out of debt. Drip feed money into super. Be intentional with your money. You will have the best life in 30 or 40 years. And you won't notice the money missing today. So that's awesome. And I'll just see if there was another poll. No, that was it. So let's answer some questions. The first one, I don't know, I'm happy to comment if you don't want to. What do you think of the Barefoot Investors' take on super, the indexed balanced? What does it mean?
So I think he's done a lot of great work talking about the benefits of index funds, and you've touched on it tonight. There's probably 2 things that he talks about, and one is the benefit of the fee, obviously, but also he talks about the long-term performance of index funds versus actively managed funds. I don't have a strong position on it, I must admit. Historically, you would tend to see that index funds would perform better when markets are doing well and stable, and you see actively managed funds potentially do a bit better when markets are moving a bit. Scott, definitely the barefooter, he does talk about, though, the importance of looking at index funds largely because they can save a significant amount of fees over a lifetime of investing.
I guess my only comments are, one, I personally don't publicly recommend people go to a specific fund or a specific product. I've got, I would just caution, in the book he mentioned a particular fund. I think it's...
If you actually, and that's where it's interesting. Book 1, he mentioned a particular fund. Book 2, he mentioned 8, I think. Because of he was actually picked up on effectively giving some leading...
So
leading
my whole thing is, if you went to Host Plus because Scott said they're the cheapest in Australia at the moment, you put your knickers in a knot when you're chasing the cheapest all the time.
Yep.
So that means when this fund over here goes, oh, now we're the cheapest. Oh, we've got to go move all our super, pull it out and go over there. I've just got the view in my life, I don't have the time or the will just to be always looking for the cheapest. Yep. I've got my super in the socially conscious balanced fund because I believe in that investment strategy.
Yep.
And I pay more than the index fund for that. And the performance hasn't been bad. So, that's just my view on that. You go somewhere on a fee, you'll be leaving on a fee. You go somewhere on a return, you'll be leaving on a return.
Yep.
There's a question here that I'll answer. Why has growth options consistently underperformed compared to balanced on your graph in the entire 2007 to 2020 period? Isn't growth supposed to be more aggressive? So I can draw something.
Yep.
If we go back to the slides, if this is 0 and this is 20, if we'll just say green for growth, okay? So we're going along, financial issue hit, the growth fund recovered, and it lands there. So we'll just say 100% growth, okay? Yep. Balanced for, I won't use blue, I'll use white. Balanced, it's a less, we'll just do dollars or risk, less
aggressive.
Less aggressive, thank you. So it's gone up. And then sometimes what happens is with compounding interest, it's interest on the interest. With the same can happen with negative returns.
Yep.
But if you look long enough, this growth will be more than balanced.
And you've got to directly respond to it, that chart is a point in time.
Yes.
And that's exactly what you're picking up here.
Yeah.
If we started that journey at a different point, and it was quite intentional to start it just before the GFC, if we started at a different point, let's say within the last 10 years when markets have been knocking the lights out, you would have a very different outcome.
Yep.
Yep.
So I think it's good to know that, my super, because I'm in the socially conscious balanced fund, it's not 100% growth. I'm probably benefiting from just a smoother return anyway.
Yep.
So that's all when you blend growth and defensive assets. Most of my financial planning practice, I didn't have any client in 100% growth.
Yep.
The highest was 85%.
And the other thing to think about, growth investments will usually have a higher exposure to things like emerging markets, shares and things like that, which gives you great opportunity. But obviously it's going to also, you're paying for that opportunity.
Totally.
Yep.
So just raise your hand if you've so far learned one thing or found this beneficial. And I guess it's a good time to say it's worth what you paid for it. So there you go. Hands are going up. So yeah, that's great. Here's a good question. How do you determine your risk profile to decide which allocation suits you and why? So I don't know if you want to draw anything. You're the artist.
I won't draw. I don't want to put myself out there now. The thing to think about, and Brian talks about this a lot, our chief economist, you've got to make sure that you've got a good gut feel about things. When it comes to risk profile, with any super fund you call or financial advisor you speak to, they'll go through a process of giving you a risk profile questionnaire. And on our website, I think we've got it that asks you about 7 or 8 questions. It is about how would you react if the share market drops significantly overnight? How far out from retirement or your investment goal are you? It asks a number of questions that really just find out from you personally how you would feel about an investment's performance one way or another, what you're willing to trade off in order for opportunity, and also what sort of time horizon you've got. For every person, that's going to be different. but it can be a really simple discussion to give you that outcome.
Again, if investment markets, if we say there's a 10-year hold, so if you're in a growth asset, we recommend you hold this at least 8 years, okay?
Yep.
So if you're 20 years old now and there's 60 now, I would even say if that's age 50, you don't need anything but growth until you're there anyway, because you can't touch the money, and who gives a freaking crap if the market falls out?
Well, and this is something I often say.
I'm sorry, I'm crass, but...
No, this is something I often say. If you're making investment decisions based on your gut reaction to the ASX yesterday, or what it's done, like it's had a bad week, if that's what's driving you to make decisions on your super that you've got invested until retirement, potentially for 20, 30, 40 years, then you're probably thinking about your super wrong. You have to be cognizant of what markets are doing, but don't let it drive your behaviour. Short-termism is the biggest failure with super, I think.
So what I'm going to draw, just to explain this again, if this is the socially conscious balanced fund that I've got, and all super and investment options, they're basically a unit trust. And I'll keep it simple. If I put $1,000 in, I might get 1,000 units, okay? Yep. Now, what happens is, that means that unit price is $1 per unit or per share. So if we go back to here, and the freaking ass falls out of the world, I still own 1,000 units. It's just the unit price may have dropped to 70 cents, not the $1 that I paid for it. And that's kind of how share prices work. So if your super does fluctuate, you still own the units, and we know over time that it's going north. So I can't give any type of personal financial advice over a freaking webinar, but the Glen James, when he was 25 years old, had a growth fund.
Yep.
Because why does the Glen James of 25 years old want to have the risk of missing out on returns over the long period? And I get it's an education piece.
And I don't want to sound naive about it, but I have a bit of a set and forget when it comes to my investments with super. I make a decision. I've actually made 3 investment changes with my super over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And that has in part been because there's been certain investments I wanted to get into. So you think about being in socially conscious investments as an example. It's something that wasn't around 10 years ago. But the other reason I've made those decisions is I've actually increased my aggressive nature of my portfolios, and I intend to just set and forget that, and I'll leave it there. Maybe when I'm about 50, I'll have a bit of a look, but really until I'm 55 or closer to 60, I probably won't even get that involved with it.
Because again, even if my example here, if we did change it at 50, well, it's still going to be invested for maybe 15 to 17 years before we can access it, but still we're not drawing it.
That might be the point, if I can put another way of looking under the bonnet. Some super funds will allow you to change your current investments or change your future investments. When I turn 50, I might very well go, look, I'm going to keep everything I've got invested how it is in this aggressive portfolio, but I'm now going to start directing my future contributions into maybe something a little less aggressive.
So again, that's why you need advice. There's a couple of other questions here. How can I check the history of contributions if I've moved super providers? I only recently started to pay attention to employer contributions, and I don't think my previous employer properly paid them to my account. Call your existing fund. Ask them for a transaction history. Possibly. There's another question. Answer live.
Can I just say on that, employers at the moment have an amnesty period where if they've not paid your contributions, the government's they would normally get penalised. At the moment, the government's allowing them to pay that money without penalty. It's probably the best opportunity you've got to very subtly go to your employer if you're still working for them and go, hey, do you want to check this?
Yep.
So
3 minutes left. How often should you be reviewing your super to ensure we're getting the most out of the super fund? One of my checklist thingies were, a lot of people go, oh, what super fund should I go to? What should I do? Well, pick up the phone, talk to your current fund.
Yep.
And maybe that's part of the health check. Just call your current provider and get them to give you a rundown. And I will say, the question that asked about risk profile and what investment options, the Sunsuper, your employer and our show and episode partner or whatever they are, I check out when I...
That's all right.
Whatever they are. Do they do super?
I'm still worried about the word you wrote earlier.
I know.
Anyway,
I know.
can you block that out?
No. If they were a contribution, that's for sure. Sunsuper offer free financial advice specific to the super fund. So if you are a member of Sunsuper, you can call them up and say, I would like to speak to an advisor. They will give you advice.
And if I can give some rules of thumbs on maybe thinking about things you should assess and how often, assess your insurance every time there's a change in your life or every 3 years, if not. When it comes to your super fund, my career, I'll be straight up, has gone for nearly 25 years. I've had 2 super funds.
So I'm just trying to work out your age. But yeah, you've had 2 super funds.
I've had 2 super funds in that time.
Yeah.
Not at the same time.
Yeah.
And I chose to move from one to Sunsuper, not just because my Sunsuper's my employer. I actually made the decision to wind my other fund up, move to Sunsuper, because I figured if it is what I'm professing, it's where I should be.
Totally.
And it was the best decision I ever made. And that's for my super. I don't just have my money in Sunsuper because I'm professing to it. It's got to be the right investment decision for me.
Totally. Now, in the chat, everyone, I've put in a link and we would love, and I'm going to answer 2 last questions. Geez, we're right on time, 8 p.m. I would love you to jump on and give us some anonymous feedback about the night. Any comments?
Should I shave the beard?
Should he shave the beard? Should I not write cursive words? Or cursive? No. Curse words.
Curses.
Can you also write your Instagram handle for people to look at? So Josh is going to write his Instagram handle. There's a question, I think now is a good time to put money into super. Is it beneficial to do a post-tax contribution or is there a more efficient method? I think if you're getting to the point where you are ready to commit to put some money into super, if it's significant, maybe you need some financial advice.
Yep.
So I think...
I would say the other thing as well in thinking about whether you put it in post-tax, pre-tax. If you put a contribution into your super yourself without a payroll or anything else, you have the opportunity to think about, do I want to claim this as a tax deduction or not?
Yeah.
So...
how much should I contribute to super, or is the more the better? Yeah, you were like this when I had my financial planning practice business. You'd get the pre-retirees or about to retire, and I say, I've worked out how much you need to have to retire on. I've got the exact number, and they're like, yeah, and they say, how much? I'm like, as much as possible. And they're like, how much should I save of my salary each week? As much as possible.
I always say the $1 million question I get asked is, do I need $1 million? I don't know.
Yeah.
We need to,
But realistically, I had a catch up with a family friend on Sunday, and she just, she's 66, just wanted a bit of an update, and I just did a bit of an education session with her. And it's just, the decisions that she made years ago are coming to light today.
Yep.
And I've been thinking I'm going to do a bit of a podcast on this thing just to mess with your mind. If you look back 20 years ago, at the Josh of 20 years ago, right? You look back, well, I can't change him. I can't do that now.
I would have at this time been backpacking through China.
Oh, wow.
And I had an iPod, which no one had ever seen before.
In China particularly, yeah. Shout out.
Now I'm really
Beijing. Shout out Beijing. But the cool thing is, right now, we're living in the Josh of 20 years in the future. We're living in your history today. So how can you make an impact for tomorrow?
Okay, you just screwed with my head.
Yeah, go watch the movie Tenet.
Yes.
Did you see that?
It's on my list big time.
Mate. There's a question here, what's your opinion on industry funds? Well, Sunsuper's an industry fund. I've got my money. I think it's a misconception, and I might finish with this.
Yep.
Because hopefully Joe from Sunsuper's not watching anymore. What up, Joe? How are you? Love your work. There's this misconception that, so pure industry fund, I don't know if it's a bigger thing as it used to be. Because if I buy a Commonwealth Bank shares, they don't ask, are you a plumber or a graphic designer? Okay. Some of the super funds for some industries, I know, for example, Cbus, building and construction. They will have a huge chunk of their super allocation into building and construction.
Yep.
But it's like, well, if I'm a builder and I'm building, do I want all my eggs in that basket anyway? So I don't know if it's...
And can I put a lot of industry funds like Sunsuper are more agnostic?
Yes.
We don't represent a particular industry. I think it more comes down to industry funds effectively are not-for-profit.
Thank you.
Whereas non-industry funds at some point have a shareholder dividend they've got to pay. That is the key difference. It's not really industry representation, although it still does drive investment decisions some degree.
In some funds,
Yeah, it is very much a decision as to the operating model.
Absolutely. So yeah, realistically, it's a bit of a moot point now. And I think if you hear industry fund, it's probably more non-for-profit because I could open a super fund tomorrow, own 100% of it and get members and manage it and basically increase the fees a little bit and pocket that to buy my new Lamborghini, which I don't have. And I probably never have one.
Is this the Glen in 20 years' time? Or?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah. So, we're getting some thank yous in the chat. So Navila says, very insightful session. Thank you.
There you go again.
Thank you so much. Louise says, thanks guys, super informative session. I won't excuse that pun. Rachel says, nice work guys, very informative. Jess said, Glen rocks. Woo, love ya. So yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, that's been amazing.
It's been a pleasure.
And again, we'll put the replay up. If you are I just want to say, like, Sunsuper is our show partner. While I absolutely will never tell one person to go to one fund, we just like to say, if you are reviewing your superannuation, just throw them in the mix.
Yep.
It might stack up, it might not. Who
Absolutely.
knows? But
at the end of the day, it's your choice.
Yeah, and just on behalf of the M3 community, thank you so much, Sunsuper, for really getting behind the financial literacy thing that we're doing with My Millennial Money.
Wonderful. Thanks.
And jump in the chat, fill out the feedback, and we will talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much, Josh, and thank you to Sunsuper. Read your
See ya.